Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Simply Bitcoin IRL. Today, we have a very, very special guest, Samson Mow. I have so many questions, so many things to ask him. But before we jump into it, I do want to give a shout out to the Bitcoin company that makes this show possible, Swan Bitcoin. It's the best place to build your Bitcoin stack. It's being built by Bitcoiners. It's for Bitcoiners. Go to swanbitcoin.com today. Start that DCA plan. Anyways, no more delay. I want to bring Samson up on stage. Samson, I'm just going to rip the Band-Aid off, just jump straight into it. You are saying $1 million Bitcoin. What's the logic behind that? Well, like, what, and not only $1 million Bitcoin, which we all know is going to come eventually, but $1 million Bitcoin in a very, very short amount of time.
Right. So I think the key message I'm trying to get across is that the macro environment has fundamentally changed. And then I did some analysis, and other people like Macronaut and BitPain and others have also done the math too. And Bitcoin going up 20x is not a difficult thing. It's done it sometimes in the past. So the key here is that everything is different now with the ETFs, with the amount of money able to flow into the Bitcoin ecosystem. And we can very rapidly go up to 1 million. Whether we stay there or not is a different question. But just the lack of supply, because we are constrained. There's about 1.4, maybe 1.6 million BTC on exchanges right now. That's not a lot. And at some point, it's going to dry up, especially at the rate at which the ETFs are hoovering up all the coins at the moment.
Gotcha. And so I'm assuming based on that statement, you do not believe in the diminishing returns theory, because that is one of the narratives this cycle. You know, every cycle you have different narratives, right? One of the big narratives by the crowd is this idea of Bitcoin has diminishing returns. You know, I think a lot of people have PTSD from the last cycle of us not breaking 100K. I have my theories. I think it was the China ban that played a huge role in that. So I'm assuming you don't believe in the diminishing returns theory.
Not really. I mean, we talk often about hyperbitcoinization. And if you believe in hyperbitcoinization, then it's impossible to believe in diminishing returns, because there should be no cycles to Bitcoin. If you're going to reach the point of hyperbitcoinization whereby we replace all fiat money, then there is nothing to go back to. So what are you measuring the returns in, right? If the US dollar no longer exists, then how can you have diminishing returns? So I guess there's two parts there. One is, will there be another cycle? And I'm not really sure. Like, just because we had 3 similar looking cycles in the past does not mean that we're always going to have this cycle, right? Because it's like flipping a coin. You get heads 3 times doesn't mean the next time it's more likely you're going to get tails. It's a different equation every single time. And the other part is, well, if Bitcoin does replace fiat, then there is no diminishing returns. You're just Bitcoin now. So it's not really possible to measure returns.
Gotcha. Interesting. Very, very interesting. And then, so let's talk a little bit about the ETF you're mentioning earlier, but I want to back that up, and I just want to comment on the absolute disaster release, the behavior by the SEC, the tweet, the early tweet, and then it was deleted, and then the next day it was approved, and then the very vengeful, spiteful post by Gary Gensler. I'm sure Elizabeth Warren was tapping on his shoulder. So what's your take on that? What's your opinion?
Well, I think it's highly likely Gary's going to lose his job, but that was probably the worst possible way they could have handled it. And even just getting to this point where they denied it for pretty much close to a decade is another big kerfuffle. So, I mean, if they had approved it on a reasonable timeline, let's say 5 years ago, they probably wouldn't have had that debacle at the launch now. But it is what it is, and I'm just glad it's all out of the way. But there's probably no way it could have gone any worse than it went. Because, like, if you did mess up and the announcement did look okay, does it really matter if someone wrote it for you or if it was a pre-drafted, unapproved tweet? I don't know all the details, but no one will. But it would have been better to just ride on it and say, yeah, it's launched now, because you launched it the next day, and then you would have saved so much face and save yourself from so much embarrassment just by saying, yeah, it's approved.
100%. And I also like tweeted out like some type of meme. It wasn't really a meme, but it was just a picture of the Bitcoin price graph, and it just a wick up and then a wick down, and then I put consumer protection brought to you by the SEC. So it seems like they failed the job that they were supposed to do, and then it got worse than that, Samson, because essentially, if you look back on their tweets, it's like, don't trust anything unless it comes from the SEC's official handle. And then it said something like, make sure to turn off your 2FA. And then it was discovered by Twitter that they didn't have their 2FA on. Like,
Yeah.
super projection.
I did a satire tweet, and I wrote, breaking, SEC's delaying ETF approvals until Q2 because compromised social media accounts can result in market manipulation and extreme volatility. And a lot of people pinged me after that in DM saying, you should delete that because it's too real. So I did delete it, and then whatever. Like some other guys posted it, but it's pretty funny. Like they could have done that and said, yeah, well, it's a risk, so we can't approve it yet.
Do you think that's like a representation of like the how do I say this nicely? I don't think you can say it nicely. Do you think it's a representation of like the inefficiencies of this very, very bloated government that's been funded by this money printer for all these decades and decades and decades? The US government's like one of the biggest employers in the world, at this point. So do you think that's a representation of that? Like if that's happening on the top echelon, the top levels, I can't even imagine what's happening, on the lower levels of that.
Well, it comes down to what can the government actually do? Can the government and these agencies actually protect anybody? And the answer is probably not, right? They're able to retroactively implement some policy, right? Like take your shoes off when you go through the scanner at the airport and all that stuff. But they can't preemptively do anything to protect people. And it really shows, the inability really shows in the fact that we have, 19,000 or 20,000 altcoins on the market now. And, they never did go after Ethereum when they did their ICO because they weren't equipped, educated, or ready to do so at the time. And they're still not doing anything. So the proliferation of all this stuff that harms people, that actually does harm people, is not something they can do anything about. They're just not able to. So I think you're right that these agencies and institutions are not very effective at what they're supposed to be doing.
100%. And do you think that the altcoins are here to stay? Because that's another thing where some of the charges, whether it was on Kraken or Coinbase, the SEC did mention that some of these altcoins are they see them as securities. Of course, for some reason they left Ethereum out, but perhaps they donated too much money. But very popular ones like Cardano, and I can't even the whole shitcoin laundry, to put it nicely. So do you foresee that as an issue, right? That these altcoins are really not just going to go away in the United States?
It's hard to say. I mean, the problem is it's a losing battle. Like they'd have to hire a lot of people to go after all these projects, right? And I think that is the main deterrent to them taking any significant action, because the SEC doesn't want to lose in court. And sadly, they pursue things like blocking ETFs, and they go to court for that and they lose for that. And I think that takes some wind out of their sails to actually go after the actual nefarious stuff and stuff that could actually make a difference. So it's hard to say, but I mean, it's the biggest problem, I think, is uneven enforcement, right? You have some enforcement, some selective enforcement on things that they think that they can get an easy win under their belt for. Like I don't know, something more innocuous like library, right? It's like a content platform token or whatever. But then they don't go after the really big stuff. And that is the biggest impact and harm that can be caused to investors. So we'll see. I mean, when Gary's gone and someone replaces him, we'll see what happens. But it's hard to say that if they will actually do anything meaningful ever.
Yeah, and that was a really good point that you brought up, which is the amount of resources. And it was actually Hester Pierce, also SEC commissioner. She said, she's like, the millions of dollars that was spent trying to delay this for political reasons rather than trying to actually focus on other things. So that was a really good point. Now, I want to get your take on this, Samson. So obviously the regulatory environment in the US has been interesting to say the least the last 2 years, right? We know the current administration, is not a big fan of the industry. And then it was actually yesterday, which I think it was a pretty historical moment, in my opinion. Not only did you have Javier Milei dropping bomb, I don't know why they allowed him to have that speech, right? Dropping bombs at the Cantillionaire Conference, aka the World Economic Forum, and you had Donald Trump, out of all people, not quite Bitcoin friendly, but advocating against central bank digital currencies, which the current administration is actually a big fan of. So clearly, in terms of the Overton window, it is shifting, right? Which is a really good thing for Bitcoiners. What's your take on the current regulatory environment? Does it concern you? The not to mention Elizabeth Warren's bill, just currently 20 senators signed up for 20% of the U.S. Senate, and a couple Republicans in there as well. So what's your take on that? Is that just a temporary thing? Do you think we're just in the beginning of the then they fight you stage?
I mean, they've been fighting us for some time, but it's an interesting dynamic that's come to play here. And I was going to tweet about it yesterday, but I ran out of time. But I think Donald Trump tweeting about his stance, or no, talking about his stance about being against CBDCs is actually massive. And like you said, it is a big shift of the Overton window. Whereas most politicians and governments were like, hey, this is innovative and it's to help you. Now it's like, this is bad. It's been happening for some time. I think DeSantis was talking about CBDCs and talking about them in the right light too. And then I think Robert Kennedy is also talking about it. There is this percolation of sentiment against CBDCs, but Trump blasting out there is very significant because he's definitely he's the Republican candidate probably now. So I think it has a lot of weight. And in terms of all the other anti-Bitcoin sentiment, I don't really think it matters. I think what we should fight for is to prevent CBDCs, because if we can stop that from coming out and really anchor that Overton window shift to be anti-CBDC, Bitcoin will win. We just have to give Bitcoin that chance to keep going, and it's a finished battle. It's a done deal. So I don't think it matters if Trump is pro-Bitcoin or not, as long as he's anti-CBDC, because the market forces always will win. So I think it's a good thing that more and more politicians are taking these more pragmatic stances rather than the more pleasant soundbite virtue signaling path that you typically see coming out of Davos. And this is, I think, why Milei dropping that bomb of a speech was significant, because one, it's at Davos, and two, it shows how much interest there is in this topic and manifesto of freedom that is being spread versus the traditional stuff that comes out of Davos usually. And you see that in the view counts, right? I think he's at millions of views now, and the next best one is 30,000 views or something like that. So it shows that the people want a certain topic to be discussed. They don't want you to plan the next world government and telling you to eat the bugs.
Yeah, and the thing that I find hilarious, which is, you have his video just went viral, right? Everyone's else is just, they're not doing so well, but also the virtue signaling of, the environment. Everyone else is flying private on their G6. There's nothing wrong with that if you could afford a private plane. But Javier Milei, like a boss travels commercial, I think on Lufthansa, and then he goes in there saying freedom, individualism versus collectivism. I think it was definitely a big shift. So pivoting back to the spot Bitcoin ETF, Samson, I had a very interesting discussion with Caitlin Long and Lawrence Lepard, and then with Greg Foss and James Lavish, and they're on the other camp. But essentially, Caitlin Long brought up the point of the dangers of rehypothecation with a spot Bitcoin ETF. So what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, there's always a risk of rehypothecation, and I don't think Bitcoin is immune to it, just because some people will always seek out the most convenient form of holding Bitcoin, and for the majority of people, it is with an ETF or with a custodian. So there is always that risk, but the benefit and the advantage that Bitcoin has is self-custody is actually quite easy, right? If you can write down 12 words, you can self-custody. And if you can drive a car, I think you can write down 12 words. So it's just about getting more people into Bitcoin. And I view the ETFs as a way to orange pill more people, just like I view nation state Bitcoin adoption as a way to get more people into Bitcoin. Um, yes, the ETFs are not the ideal format for us hardcore Bitcoiners that are all about self custody. And yes, it's not ideal that countries accumulate a lot of Bitcoin. It's better that people accumulate a lot of Bitcoin. But it's also a way to reach more people. So I think you have to take the good with the bad. And eventually, people will learn to self custody simply because you have to pay a lot of fees, right? Even with the low fees the ETFs are charging, it's still significant. And when you compound that over a number of years.
100%. And speaking of self custody, I'm really glad that you brought that up. You just announced your new project, the Aqua wallet. I'm gonna pull it up right. So, Samson, what is this? Why don't you give a quick, if you can, if you can, that'd be really appreciated. A quick elevator pitch. What is the Aqua wallet? First of all, the website's awesome, by the way. So,
Thanks.
what is this?
So Aqua is a Bitcoin wallet that supports layer 2. We have the Liquid network integrated as well as the Lightning network. And we also have stablecoins like USDT. And I think the differentiating factor here is we are one of the first wallets out there that actually delivers a seamless experience between all these different Bitcoin layers and assets. So your typical Bitcoin wallet might just store Bitcoin. And then you might have a way to access some dollar derivative, but it's not Tether, right? And Tether is used mostly throughout the global south. Like in Latin America, they just call Tether digital dollars. They don't call it Tether. So that's the level of dominance that it has. And I think most wallets don't appreciate that or understand that. And that's why they're not supporting it. And we end up losing a lot of transaction volume and AUM of Tether to the altcoin chains. And the goal is that we can bring that back to Bitcoin because, well, when you're storing USDT on your Aqua wallet, it's on the Liquid chain. And there's no need to buy Tron or Ethereum or any altcoin to send that around. And in fact, we have a feature coming out soon, which will let you pay for USDT transactions with USDT. So you don't even need Liquid Bitcoin to send it. And I think this is a way for us to get more people in Latin America into the Bitcoin ecosystem, because a lot of them are looking for digital dollars and they may not be using Bitcoin, but I mean, it's just a short hop and a jump to get to Bitcoin. And Aqua features Bitcoin very prominently as a savings account and a spending account. So that's the idea, really, to drive a lot of people into the Bitcoin ecosystem. But yeah, we support right now Liquid and Lightning. Lightning is mainly a rail, so you can send and receive on Lightning. We do submarine swaps with Bolt, so it's trustless. And then your funds are stored in Liquid Bitcoin, so you don't have to deal with any channel management and things like that. So it's a pretty good set of trade-offs, I think, to deliver accessible layer 2 Bitcoin to the average user.
Yeah, and I love the Tether integration aspect of it because so my cousin launched a exchange in Central and South America, and currently in Colombia he's doing volume, and I was like, hey, so what are you selling? Like, you know, are people buying altcoins or people buying Bitcoin? He's like, Nico, 99% of my business is OTC Tether transactions, right? And I think that they have like one of the only approvals from the central bank in Colombia, and this is telling me, he's like, it's Tether. People just want that, you know, that stability versus their local currency. So the fact that I think you have that Tether integration, and not to mention the fact that I think Tether on certain chains is actually extremely expensive. So that this wallet fixes that, I'm assuming.
Yeah, Liquid Tether transactions are about 10 cents or now, something like that right now. And we have some plans in the works to decrease it by a factor of 10. So it should be about 1 cent. Most Tron wallets charge $1 for Tether on Tron. and Ethereum can go up to $13 to $20 depending on the state of the chain. So I think there's a big advantage here, and plus you have confidential transactions in Liquid, so it's faster, cheaper, and confidential. And I think people will learn to appreciate that over time. So we just have to start pushing it. And the beautiful thing is because we have this wallet out now, we can start to engage with local fiat on and off ramps, and maybe the OTC desks like that one that you mentioned from your friend there, and tell them to support Liquid Tether, because previously there's not really a good option to use Liquid
Yeah.
Tether.
And another thing, Samson, that I wanted to ask you, which is obviously the regulatory environment for Tether itself, right? So, like DOJ has been on a warpath, right? They took down, they didn't take down Binance. They co-opted Binance, right? So does that worry you at all? Because I know if you're a Bitcoiner, you know that Tether plays a big role in the Bitcoin ecosystem. Does that worry you at all in terms of potential regulatory hostility coming from the Department of Treasury or the DOJ?
Not really. I mean, the all of that stuff has been settled a long time ago, and Tether doesn't operate in the U.S., and their main focus is really the global South and developing markets. So I don't really think it offends them in any way. I mean, maybe they could, but then you're getting into very challenging territory. Like, what could they actually do to Tether? Because another country can use the dollar. Why can't a company that's serving global South use the dollar as well? So the question is really what happens to it. Maybe they could pass some very specific stablecoin regulation, but that would also kill the US based stablecoins as well. So I just don't see anything happening there. In terms of like existential risk, I really don't see anything, because the Tether is one of the largest holders of US treasuries right now. I think they're up there with countries like Mexico and others in the top 20 or top 25 of UST holders. So I mean, you could do that, but it wouldn't be. You could go after it and shut it all down, but it wouldn't be the smartest thing to do, especially when the demand for treasuries is dropping. So I don't put it past any government administration to do that, but it doesn't make sense if you're thinking about things rationally. And also, recently in Davos, the CEO of Cantor Fitzgerald was on, I think, Bloomberg, and oh no, CNBC, one of those. But he was saying, Tether, they have the money. We've seen it. We manage their assets, and that sort of destroys all Tether FUD, right? You have one of the largest prime dealers in the U.S., one of 24, one of the largest capital equities companies on the planet, saying we manage their assets, and we've seen that they have the assets. That's a very powerful thing, and it essentially destroys all of the FUD and all the narratives that have been swirling around Tether for the last decade almost. And it's also funny because Tether has always been a target of the mainstream media. Financial Times, every single mainstream media rag has targeted them at some point. But they could have just picked any other project, like, I don't know, Celsius, BlockFi, FTX, and they would have been right. But they picked the stablecoin to go after, the one that has attestations from a top 5 accounting firm saying they have the assets. So none of this really makes sense. I think it's people just trying to instill fear in the market, but Tether is a solid product, and they have 60,000 something BTC in their reserves right now. They recently just bought 8,888 more coins. And as the value of Bitcoin goes up, there's going to be a point at which their reserves are double their liabilities. So right now, I think they're at 95 billion USDT in AUM, at probably 1.4, assuming they keep the same amount of Bitcoin, at $1.4 million per Bitcoin, they'll have double their liabilities.
Gotcha. No, and if my research serves me correctly, I believe they have a direct account with the Fed. Like Tether has an account with the Fed as well.
I don't know, maybe.
Yeah. So interesting. So Samson, so obviously as Bitcoiners, we want hyper Bitcoinization. We want the world to run on a Bitcoin standard. Do you see Tether as, a stepping stone towards that? What do you see? How do you see Tether's role in the, because right now how it, and if you do a little bit of research, it does play a very important role. And
It
yeah.
definitely does.
So what is it a step towards hyper Bitcoinization?
Yeah, so in 2018 at some conference, I think I was on stage and I said Tether. It was a panel of stablecoins. I remember a few other stablecoin people there. I'm not sure why I was on that panel, but they put me on the panel. But I was talking about Tether and I said Tether is a mid-step towards hyper Bitcoinization. It's a way for people to get into this ecosystem and then move on to Bitcoin, because not everyone has a bank account. Tether serves as the last mile for banking for much of the world. Like we have the situation of people that are unbanked. And yes, we can bank them with Bitcoin, but you can also bank them with Tether on Liquid or other chains if you must. But the fact is, you can get people access to the financial system through this mechanism. And it's not rational to think everyone's going to suddenly jump into Bitcoin. That's more of a Western perspective. Like people that think that probably have a bank account and they can make SEPA transfers or Interac or ACH or whatever. But you have to remember, there are billions of people in the world that can't do any of that. And they do want digital dollars. And this is why Tether is so dominant in the global south, because they're looking for something to protect themselves from inflation and hyperinflation. But Bitcoin seems far off for them. But a dollar is something that they're familiar with. Like most people know what a dollar is. That's why it's the reserve currency. And Tether gives them access to that reserve currency. So I think you need to be willing to accept that Tether is an important part to get to hyper-Bitcoinization. And I've talked to Paulo before too. He doesn't believe that, Tether, the stablecoin, they do a lot more now. They have energy and mining and a lot of other things. But he doesn't think the stablecoin will exist forever because the dollar won't exist forever too. So I think we're more or less all on the same wavelength that stablecoins are a mid-step to getting towards hyper-Bitcoinization.
Gotcha. Yeah, and I agree with that. And that's what's really interesting about the Aqua wallet is that it has Tether there. And Samson, if people were interested in downloading this, where could they find it?
Yeah, you can get it on the iOS App Store and on Google Play, and just search for Aqua Wallet. The safest way is probably to go to our website, aquawallet.io, and find the links there. In case the App Store has put up a fake one, which is getting more and more common these
Opti,
days.
could you pull up the link while Samson and I keep talking? And another thing, Samson, that I want to talk to you about is January 3rd, right? So Jan 3rd specifically. So obviously the mission, and you left Blockstream, which is an amazing company, and you dedicated your life, which I think is absolutely badass, I might add, to nation state adoption of Bitcoin. We've seen some amazing recent developments out of Honduras. What do you know about that, and what can we expect from the region?
In Honduras?
Yes. Like, what is the current state of Bitcoin nation state adoption? I'll put it like that. I'll say it like that.
Okay. So we are engaged in a number of countries, and the level of the discussions varies from place to place. But last year we went to Montenegro, met with the prime minister there. We were in Colombia, met with the president there. We were in Suriname, met with the president there and the central bank. Also in Colombia, we met with the largest bank too. But I think the important thing about Jan3's mission of accelerating Bitcoin adoption and in working with governments and politicians and regulators is that we can get the message out there about Bitcoin. And we can educate them about what Bitcoin is. And then we can also talk about why CBDCs are bad and other topics too. So I think it's a useful tool to educate a lot of the world. And if we can get countries to adopt Bitcoin, then like we talked about before, we can have more people learning about Bitcoin, just like in El Salvador, when the government implemented their Bitcoin law and their digital securities law. Well, that onboards a lot of people into Bitcoin that otherwise would not have bothered or even cared to. So the implication really is we have countries that adopt Bitcoin, But at a lower level, a really good outcome is that they don't have bad legislation like banning self-custody or self-hosted wallets or things like that. So I think the work that we are doing is quite important in the path to hyper-Bitcoinization.
And so, that started off very strong, right? So you had the monumental, and I never forget this conference. It was the first Bitcoin conference I spoke at, Bitcoin 2021. And you had that amazing announcement, Max Kaiser, Michael Saylor on stage, F Elon, the whole, all those moments, right? And you had the video announcement from Nayib Bukele basically saying we're going to make Bitcoin legal tender. And then it seemed like the general consensus is it seems like it slowed down a little bit after that. I have a theory on that. I think El Salvador caught them by surprise, and then all of a sudden, I think they have their brace for impact. So what's your thoughts on this? Like, are you seeing pushback from governments? Are they, is the IMF in there? Is the World Bank like, no, 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 no? So what are your thoughts? And of course, Nayib Bukele is a great leader. You have someone who's very, very convicted in his beliefs, and not to mention the fact that the popularity he has in his electorate is extremely high. He's the most popular president in the Americas. So, what's your take on that? Are we going to see a country this cycle follow the steps of El Salvador?
Yeah, so El Salvador took the large brunt of, I guess, animosity from the IMF on all of their Bitcoin things. And fortunately, they did really well for themselves, right? They boosted their economy, their GDP, their traditional bonds are rallying. So there's not that much that the IMF can say because everything they've done has been a success. So I think it makes it easier for subsequent countries to implement a Bitcoin strategy without fearing too much of the ire of the IMF. Basically, they went at the king, right? And they have one shot, but they lost. So, like, what can they say with the next country? Like, you shouldn't do that because El Salvador is successful. I mean, they could, but it doesn't make any sense. And if you look at the media and all their publications, a lot of it has quieted down. The IMF is not criticizing them anymore, and I think with good reason. So it makes it easier for us as Jan3 to go and talk to the different countries and say, well, you can do a Bitcoin strategy, and it's okay because IMF is not going to say anything now. I'm sure when they do it, there will be a little bit of saber rattling, but at the end of the day, countries have to look out for their own best interests, not the interests of the IMF to keep loan sharking, right? So that is really a litmus test. Can the leader of a country take the decisions that are in the best interest and get that country out of debt, out of subservience, and be sovereign? And the interesting trend that we're seeing now is we're seeing politicians come out and talk about this, and you can take that with a grain of salt, but that is the trend, like Milei with Bobby Kennedy and a number of others. So the tide seems to be shifting towards more about pragmatism and being actually sovereign countries.
Yeah. No, and I agree. I think the things are definitely shifting, and not only in the political sphere, but also on an individual level. I think people are starting to question the old, just because, like, to be frank, like the amount of BS that has come out, over the last 5 years, and just how the SEC, how they handled that is a great example, right? And I think people are just questioning the very what should the role of government be in my life? And I think that's good for Bitcoin. Everything's good for Bitcoin. So Samson, I don't even know how do you go about, orange pilling a nation? How do you go about convincing a nation to adopt Bitcoin? I remember I did see those pictures with you and the president of Colombia. So how do you approach that?
Well, we have a lot of help. So we have this network of Jan3 associates in all these different countries that help us open doors. And it's really just ordinary people like plebs and Bitcoiners from all walks of life that want to help, and they have a connection to somebody that might know somebody. And then eventually we work our way up through meetings and discussions, and then we get that in-person meeting. And hopefully we get some real Bitcoin strategies coming out of that. And this is what we're mainly focused on for 2024, following up on all the things that were started in 2023 and just getting that next step. But it's really encouraging because I think with the ETFs being approved, with Bitcoin price action going up, it makes it easier and it makes people more interested in Bitcoin. It's the Veblen effect, right? So when Bitcoin is down at 16 or 15, nobody wants it. But when it's up, then people are interested again. So we have to use that and use what's in our favor to leverage that and take advantage of that.
Absolutely. And the question I have for you, right, is, so let's say a government has a very strong fiat currency, like, like the United States, or, the European Union, or, Switzerland, for example. What incentive does the government there have to adopt something like Bitcoin? Because it essentially would be a competitor to their fiat currency. And then, of course, we all know that governments all around the world love to deficit spend, love to spend money that they don't have, and they do that via money printing. So what incentive does, do these countries have to not only make Bitcoin legal tender, but even put Bitcoin on equal footing to their currencies? Because then at that point it's game over, right? It's just like you said about Donald Trump. It's not necessarily important for him to be advocating for Bitcoin. The market forces are going to do their thing. Just him stopping CBDCs just gives us time, right? So, what incentive how do you approach that in the first place?
Well, it's challenging because if you have a strong fiat currency, you're not incentivized to do anything with Bitcoin unless you're able to see past the short term and understand that all fiat currencies will fail eventually. It's just a matter of time, right? And it's all relative to one another. Everything is sort of pegged to the US dollar in some way. So if the US dollar goes, and that's getting more and more likely if you look at debt and the amount that you have to pay to service that debt, it is starting to get very cumbersome. Like they cannot keep paying hundreds of billions of dollars to service this debt that's going to keep ballooning, because just like with compound interest, well, it is compound interest, but it's compound interest on debt, which is just as powerful as compound interest on savings, right? So it's not a really good situation, I think, for the whole fiat system. And if you can see further ahead, a few steps ahead, then you would want to make a Bitcoin strategy and implement some form of Bitcoin holdings, either at the central bank or through mining. And this is what we're advising countries to do, because you can see that you're future-proofing your country against the fiat collapse. But it is challenging, and I think this is why we don't really pursue wealthy, well, quote-unquote wealthy Western nations to pursue a Bitcoin strategy. We more focus on Latin America and other countries that need Bitcoin, and they have the demand for it right now because they need money, they need to build roads and infrastructures or anything like that. So we just go where we're more needed, and we'll be opportunistic, and we'll try to work with Western countries. But it's really an uphill battle because it's so insular, and they're so unaware of the fiat money system. But there are inroads, right? So in Germany, you have Bitcoin in Bundestag, Bitcoin in Parliament, and this initiative that's set up to educate the politicians in the Bundestag. And I'll be going there to speak later this year, and they have a stellar lineup of all these other speakers like Block Trainer and other guys. So we'll go and we'll try to educate the parliament and see what we can do. But it's not like we're going, not for Jan3, we're not going to, go all in and focus on the Western countries. We'll do what we can, but the efforts, the biggest payoff for our efforts is probably in the global South, in Latin America and maybe Africa and other countries.
Gotcha. I mean, so being from Venezuela originally, my parents and my background, I understand the culture a little bit, and I completely 100% agree with you. And I had Jeff Booth on maybe a couple months ago or so, and he said something very similar. He said, I'm optimistic about the global South because they're farther away from the benefits of being able to print their own money, right? If you're someone like Argentina, I said this as a joke the other day when Malay got elected. I'm like, guys, now we have a blueprint. All we need is 150% inflation, and we can get a libertarian elected. But yeah, I 100% agree. Could you drop some hints? Maybe I don't want to put you in a corner. What Latin American country you're optimistic about?
We'll have to see. I mean, I'm optimistic about all the countries we've had engagements with because the presidents there are very receptive, but they are not Bitcoiners yet, right? So the benefit, and I think part of the misalignment of expectations is in El Salvador, the President Bukele was a Bitcoiner that became president. We're starting from zero. So the presidents in these countries are not Bitcoiners first. We're trying to get them there. So it'll take more time. And even if we get them there, there's still a lot of bureaucracy to deal with to implement things and different factions and different ideologies at play. So it is a really challenging road, but we are here for the long run, right? We never expected we're going to get a ton of countries like tomorrow, but we can engage with a ton of countries, and of that, we should have a subset relatively soon doing some concrete Bitcoin projects, maybe mining. If not legal tender, maybe it's mining, right? But actually, better than legal tender is what Malay did in Argentina, which is deregulation. You can use whatever you want and let the free market compete. So there's all these different paths towards Bitcoin adoption, and we just have to be strategic and choose the best ones that we can push forward.
How do you feel about the fee environment? So Bob Burnett, good friend of mine, came on the podcast a couple of weeks ago, and he said that the era of low fees is over. Now we're heading into an era of this is the most valuable real estate on the planet. You're gonna potentially have a high fee environment moving forward in Bitcoin's history, and that prices out a lot of people in a way, right? So let's say you want to have $100 worth of Bitcoin. Let's say Bitcoin's at $500,000, $1 million, and you want to buy $100 worth of Bitcoin. Just to send that $100, you're going to be paying a big chunk of that, right? So of course, been in Bitcoin for 8 years now. Samson, I'm sure you've been in Bitcoin a lot longer. That's okay for us. We're just like, fine. But is Bitcoin for everyone? Like, what happens to someone who just wants to buy a small portion and they're feed out?
Yeah, Bitcoin is for everyone. And the fees are going to be an issue if you want to transact on chain. But fortunately, we do have things like layer twos, like Lightning, like Liquid, that can enable people to transact. Also, Fedimints too. So I think the way that we will onboard most people is through some combination of Lightning plus a Fedimint or a Liquid Federation, because that is really the only way, right? I did some testing when we launched Aqua with some of the non-custodial Lightning wallets. Or sorry, there's one more path too, which is custodial Lightning. But that's challenging in and of itself because you can see wallets like Wallet of Satoshi being removed from app stores, or they're self-removing themselves from app stores in certain jurisdictions. So the key is that Lightning is bound to the main chain, right? It works really well when it's relatively cheap on the main chain, but as soon as fees go up, it all breaks. And this is why having a mid-step in between Lightning and the main chain, like Lightning, like Liquid, is useful because you can go down to Liquid and come back up. And what we've seen is a lot of people have started using that use case. They're using peer swap to rebalance channels, or they're using bolts to rebalance as well. And bolts' volumes for Lightning rebalancing are through the roof on Liquid. And I think this is really the only way, because if you go to look at some of the non-custodial Lightning wallets out there, they'll charge you 1% to open a channel, or some minimum fee of like $11. So you can't really just get someone in, I don't know, Colombia to download a Lightning wallet and send them a couple sats if it's non-custodial, right? The only way to do that is with something like Wallet of Satoshi or with Aqua, because we will swap to Liquid. But if you want them to be, in the ideal Bitcoin operation area of self-custody and everything, and non-custodial, then it's not really possible unless you're willing to pay $11 to send someone 100 sats.
Yeah. And I think you buried the lead there for a second, Samson. So you're saying that if you can download Aqua Wallet right now, you could start receiving Lightning transactions, very little fees, similar experience to Wallet of Satoshi.
Yeah, exactly. So right now, it's not ideal for that size of a transaction, like sending less than 1,000 sats, because it is an atomic swap, and it is a swap to liquid. So there is like probably a 19-cent fee right now to send and receive. But we are working on an update that will allow us to use unconfidential transactions or non-confidential transactions on Liquid, and that will decrease the cost by a factor of 10. So you'll be able to do that for 2 cents maybe. And I think this gives you that same wallet of Satoshi experience where you can say, hey, download the Aqua and I'll send you 1,000 sats or 2,000 sats.
Gotcha. Very, very cool. That is really interesting. I really, really want to play around with it now and just kind of experiment. So I do want to ask you this, Samson. So, well, that just got me so excited. I lost my train of thought. Okay. So part of the reason that the Wallet of Satoshi pulled out of the US was, and there, I posted this the other day, by the way, on Twitter. And it was like, and of course they were trolling in this, but it says we're not available in the app stores in China, US, and North Korea. Like it was such a, like, that's such a strong statement.
It is.
And the reason that I believe they pulled out is because of the DOJ press conference with Binance when they literally mentioned terrorism 15 times, even though we know that less than 1% of illicit finance is, used Bitcoin. But that is a great excuse for government, right? So is this like a is this custodial? Is it self-custodial? How does how's Aqua Wallet work?
Yeah, so Aqua is non-custodial. So when you create a wallet, you have one seed that generates your Bitcoin wallet and your Liquid wallet.
And that, hold on, and that's associated. So obviously, the main wallet, of course, is non-custodial, but I'm saying the Lightning wallet as well is non-custodial.
There is no Lightning wallet, so it's swapping from Lightning to Liquid. So
Oh.
Liquid is what's holding that balance, and then you swap back out when you send out over Lightning again.
Okay, and could you explain, because I know that Lightning is very, very popular amongst Bitcoiners, but Liquid's always been around for a while now. But it seems like the use case is starting to ramp up, and of course, people are looking at it now. What is Liquid?
So Liquid is a Bitcoin sidechain. It's a layer 2 of Bitcoin, and I think some people were critiquing, saying it's not a layer 2. But I mean, when Blockstream started developing sidechains and Liquid, this is like in 2014, 2015, we're all calling it layer 2. So we're calling it layer 2 before many of these people that say it's not a layer 2 even knew about Bitcoin. So it's kind of funny that way. But it's a side chain. So it's another chain that's anchored to Bitcoin. It's almost the same code base. It's like 99% the same as Bitcoin, except for you have assets in there and other things like confidential transactions. And Liquid and that software suite has largely been a testing ground for a lot of things that eventually do make their way to Bitcoin, like SegWit and other things. So it's definitely very tightly bound to Bitcoin. So when you want to get one Bitcoin in Liquid, you have to peg in one Bitcoin from the main chain. So it's always a one-to-one relationship. You can't have fractional Bitcoin in Liquid. So once you have that, then you can transact it with 1 minute block times. Fees are about 19 cents or so, and you have confidentiality. So when you send someone a transaction, you can't actually see the amount or asset type that they're sending, which gives a lot of privacy benefits to users.
Absolutely. And so another thing, you mentioned this, I think, in your tweet in regards to the $1 million Bitcoin, that it was going to be painful. I feel like and I'm sure you read this, right? Ben, the Carman's post in relation to the state of Lightning. I don't think we're ready for, this hyper Bitcoinization. I don't think we're ready. Bitcoin is ready for this massive influx of users, So what would you say on that?
Probably not, and that's the basis of Max Payne theory. So the best case scenario, I think, is Bitcoin price goes up very gradually towards a million over a number of years, and we all have a lot of time to stack sats and build out everything that's needed. And Max Payne theory says, well, you probably won't have that time. It's going to be a mad scramble, and we won't be ready with layer twos and all the wallets. We won't be ready to onboard all the people, and a lot of plebs out there that have been DCAing are going to get stuck with unspendable UTXOs because fees are now, I don't know, 100,000 sats or something like that. So that's the idea. Like, it's probably going to happen and catch us off guard, and we're all going to be unprepared. That's the basis of Max Payne theory.
So, okay, and then let me ask you something. Why you? This is fascinating. So why you? Okay, Max Payne theory, and then could you explain the theory? Like, where does it come from?
It's I think it comes from options expiry. There's a certain point at which the options expire. That's max pain. Like that'll cause the most losses for the most number of people. So you can apply that, I think, to Bitcoin in the world at whole. So if Bitcoin does shoot up to 1 million, that's probably max pain for the largest number of people, because instead of being able to make a material difference in your financial economic situation by acquiring a lot of Bitcoin, the quintillionaires are going to buy up all the Bitcoin, drive the price up, and you'll still have this divide between the rich and the poor instead of that being equalized. So basically 8 billion people are not going to be able to get in early. They're just going to be earning Bitcoin at 1M per BTC.
Interesting. Okay. So, okay. And you think, and you said something really interesting, which is it almost as if Bitcoin would be an equalizer between, because right now the wealth inequality is caused literally because of the fiat money printer, right? Yeah. The more money they print, the lower middle classes are saving and earning in fiat, and the wealthier are saving in assets. Therefore, they benefit from asset inflation. They get richer, and then everyone else just gets left behind. And you think Bitcoin will fix that?
Well, it will fix that in some ways, but if the price rises very rapidly, then you lose some of that fixing effect, because you're not going to get Bitcoin at sub 1 million anymore. You'll be getting it at 1 million or more even, right?
Samson, you're making me incredibly bullish right now.
Also,
the energy is coming through the screen.
Well, is the price going up? That's the test. But
it is. It actually went from 40,000 to now it's back to 41.5.
Yeah, but the main point is all of this is a rounding error, right? If you believe that Bitcoin is going to become the new base currency of a financial system and the money of the world, then it doesn't matter if it's 0.04 million per Bitcoin or if it's 0.5 million per Bitcoin.
Okay. And so, by the way, I'm obviously, my show's name is Simply Bitcoin. I'm in the camp of hyperbitcoinization. What is the timeline here? So are we talking about $1 million Bitcoin with, you're saying basically very, very soon, but let's say it takes a little bit longer. Let's say we take the least painful route, the less painful route, right? And give everyone an opportunity to stack, cheaper sats. And by the way, I love the denominator thing. I think it's absolutely hilarious, and I'm going to adopt it myself, the 0.04. It's so good. It's so good. But let's say, it takes a little bit slower. I think it was Cathie Wood that released her base, her bear, her base, her bull. Her bear was 250K. Her base was 650K, and her bull was 1.5. And this was by the year 2030. Where do you stand on that?
Well, I think it should reach something like 1 million within the next year. I would say that's my more conservative estimate. And the reason why I front loaded it, I said it'll be very, very soon before the halving, is because typically we make new all-time highs after the halving, after some number of months after the halving. And that would just mean that there is a cycle. And I don't think that we will continue to have that cycle. So that means it has to be before the halving. And before halving means very, very soon.
Gotcha.
But yeah, like when we make our... so the 1 million thing is really for fun. It's for entertainment. And some people are really angry saying you shouldn't make predictions. But I think BitPain also gets a lot of flack for it too, because he's also making it. But we don't believe that you can, one, predict, and two, Bitcoin is going to go to 1 million sooner or later. So it's just like we're predicting, next year there's going to be a summer, right? It's a inevitability. So it's for fun, but it's really just a number out there that we can anchor to and have fun with and entertain ourselves as we go into this next bull market.
Absolutely, 100%. And we were talking about the diminishing returns thing earlier on, right? So, and I think that's an American Hodl did a great job covering this, and I think he put like a Squirtle with the saxophone. Like someone tells me that's like, we can't hit 500. My brain is thinking this. Okay. So then if you were to put, I hate getting into price prediction stuff. Maybe let's just avoid that topic altogether. But okay.
I think I forgot one point. I was saying when we make projections for things like Bitcoin bonds, we use 60% median returns every year. So if we started from 30 something last year, in 10 years time, we should be at just about 3 million per coin. So that's a very, very conservative estimate. And that's based on historical price appreciation after 2014 or so. So 1 million in the next couple of years is almost definitely in line with a very conservative estimate.
Yeah. And I would agree with that. And let me ask you something else. So, we are getting to the top of the hour, and I do want to be respectful of your time. What are you most excited for within the next 5 to 10 years? Like what are you, obviously nation state adoption, but what is, at the top of your mind? What is something that you feel so passionate about? You're like, wow, this is going to happen. I'm a content creator. So for me, it's like media, Bitcoin content, crossing the breaking the Bitcoin echo chamber. Now it's being talked about in the mainstream consciousness. As a content creator, that's my dream. That's what I'm seeing. That's what I hope for. So what are you most excited for, Samson Mow?
Well, I think I'm most excited about reaching the state of hyperbitcoinization where everyone is just using Bitcoin. And I think we'll have so much more efficiencies in the world where you can travel and just spend Bitcoin without having to go to the little kiosk and converting your dollars to pesos or euros or whatever. And you just save a lot of time. And I think it'll make international trade better too if everyone is trading on that Bitcoin standard. So really, it's just being able to enjoy life on Bitcoin, whether you're traveling or trying to save. Because right now, if you're trying to save, you can't really do it in the fiat system. You have to invest your money to save. But on a Bitcoin standard, you can simply save. So Bitcoin just streamlines so many things when we all adopt it as a standard.
100%. And I think the Aqua wallet is just one step towards that, enabling that seamlessness where we are currently in time. Anyways, Samson, this was truly an honor. I really, really enjoyed this conversation. Guys, check out the Aqua wallet. Go to aquawallet.io. Check out jan3.com. And Samson, thank you so much for coming on the show, and hope to have you back on in a couple months or so.
Yeah, let's do it. Thanks.
Really appreciate it. Guys, thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of Simply Bitcoin IRL. If you enjoyed the show, smash that like button. Consider subscribing if you feel like we provided you value. Tune into the Monday show. Simply Bitcoin Live will be back 12:15 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. But until then, take care, everybody. Enjoy your weekend.